One of the most striking features of the Torah is its emphasis on love of and vigilance towards the ger, the stranger. Don't oppress a stranger. You yourselves know how it feels to be strangers, because you were once strangers in Egypt. For the Lord your God is God of gods and Lord of lords, the great, mighty, and awesome God who shows no partiality, accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger residing among you, giving them food and clothing. You are to love those who are strangers, for you yourselves were strangers in Egypt. The sages went so far as to say that the Torah commands us in only one place to love our neighbor, but in 36 places to love the stranger. What is the definition of a stranger? Clearly the reference is to one who isn't Jewish by birth. It could mean one of the original inhabitants of the land of Canaan. It might mean one of the mixed multitude who left Egypt with the Israelites. Or it could mean a foreigner who's entered the land seeking safety or a livelihood. Whatever the case, immense significance is attached to the way the Israelites treat the stranger. That's what they were meant to have learned from their own experience of exile and suffering in Egypt. They were strangers. They were oppressed. Therefore, they knew how it feels to be a stranger. They were not to inflict on others what was once inflicted on them. The sages held that the word ger might mean two things. One was ger tzedek, a convert to Judaism who had accepted all the commands and obligations. The other was the ger toshav, the resident alien, who hadn't adopted the religion of Israel but who lived in the land of Israel. BeHar spells out the rights of such a person. Specifically, if any of your fellow Israelites become poor and are unable to support themselves among you, help them as you would a resident alien, so that they can continue to live among you. There is, in other words, an obligation to support and sustain a resident alien. Not only does he or she have the right to live in the Holy Land, but they have the right to share in its welfare provisions. Recall that this is a very ancient law indeed. Long before the sages formulated principles such as the ways of peace, obligating Jews to extend charity and care to non-Jews as well as Jews. What then was a ger toshav? There are three views in the Talmud. According to Rabbi Meir, it was anyone who took on himself not to worship idols. According to the sages, it was anyone who committed himself to keep the 7 commands of Noah. And a third view, more stringent, held that a ger toshav was someone who had undertaken to keep all the laws of Torah except one, the prohibition of meat not ritually slaughtered. The law follows the sages. In other words, a ger toshav is a non-Jew living in Israel who accepts the Sheva mitzvot b'nei Noach, the Noachide laws, binding on everyone. Ger toshav legislation is therefore one of the earliest extant forms of minority rights. According to the Rambam, there's an obligation on Jews in Israel to establish courts of law for resident aliens, to allow them to settle their own disputes, or disputes they have with Jews according to the provisions of Noachide law. And the Rambam adds one should act towards resident aliens with the same respect and loving kindness as you would to a fellow Jew. The difference between this and the later ways of peace legislation is that the ways of peace apply to non-Jews without regard to their beliefs or religious practice. They date from a time when Jews were a minority in a predominantly non-Jewish, non-monotheistic environment. Ways of peace, darchei shalom, are essentially pragmatic rules of what today we'd call good community relations and active citizenship in a multi-ethnic society. Ger toshav legislation cuts deeper. It's based not on pragmatism but religious principle. According to the Torah, you don't have to be Jewish in a Jewish society to have many of the rights of citizenship. You just have to be moral. How does this work out in practice? One biblical vignette portrays this with enormous power. King David has fallen in love and had an adulterous affair with Bathsheba, the wife of a Ger Toshav, Uriah the Hittite. She becomes pregnant. Uriah, meanwhile, has been away from home as a soldier in Israel's army. David, afraid that Uriah will come home and see that his wife is pregnant, realized that she's committed adultery and come to discover that it was the king who was the guilty party, has Uriah brought home. His pretext is that he wants to know how the battle is going. He then tells Uriah to go home and sleep with his wife before returning, so that he'll later assume that she became pregnant because of him and that he himself is the father of the child. The plan fails. This is what happens. So David sent this word to Joab, "Send me Uriah the Hittite." And Joab sent him to David. When Uriah came to him, David asked him how Joab was, how the soldiers were, and how the war was going. Then David said to Uriah, "Go down to your house and wash your feet." So Uriah left the palace, and a gift from the king was sent to him. But Uriah slept at the entrance to the palace with all his master's servants, and did not go to his own house. David was told Uriah did not go home. So he asked Uriah, "Haven't you just come from a military campaign? Why didn't you go home?" Uriah said to David, "The ark and Israel and Judah are staying in tents, and my commander Joab and my lord's men are camped in the open country. How could I go to my house to eat and drink and make love to my wife? As surely as you live, I wouldn't do such a thing." Uriah's utter loyalty to the Jewish people, despite the fact that he himself wasn't Jewish, is contrasted with King David, who stayed in Jerusalem, not been with his people's army, instead had a relationship with another man's wife. The fact that Tanakh can tell such a story, in which a resident alien is the moral hero, and David, Israel's greatest king, the wrongdoer, tells us much about the morality of Judaism. Minority rights are the best test of a free and just society. Since the days of Moses, they've been central to the vision of the kind of society God wants us to create in the land of Israel. How vital, therefore, that we take them seriously today. Shabbat Shalom.